I'm 43, married, and I have 2 daughters. Emily is 18, and Claire is 14. This story isn't about my marriage exactly, or about being a mom. It's about a single road trip to drop my oldest off at college that completely unraveled the life I thought I had. A few weeks ago, I packed up the car with Emily, her suitcases, her favorite pillow, snacks, and a playlist we made together when she was 13. It was supposed to be a special weekend, one last mother-daughter trip before she officially became a college freshman. My husband, Dan, stayed behind with Claire because we thought it would be less stressful than dragging the whole family along. The drive to her university was 5 hours, and the closer we got, the more emotional I felt. Not in a sad way, but the kind of overwhelmed that sneaks up on you in moments that are supposed to feel normal. I kept glancing at Emily in the passenger seat, wondering where the years went. One minute you're cleaning up crayon off the walls, and the next you're trying not to cry while she picks out a dorm comforter. We were about an hour away when she dozed off, and I stopped for gas. I left the car running with the AC on, pumped the gas, and went inside to grab a drink. Just as I stepped back into the car, her phone buzzed. It was sitting face up on the center console. I didn't mean to look. I really didn't. But the name on the screen caught my eye. Dad. Work. It struck me as odd. Emily always just called Dan Dad. Never Dad Work. I figured it was a work emergency or something important, so I hesitated. But I tapped to silence the notification before it woke her. That's when I saw the preview of the text. It said, "Let me know when she's gone. I miss you like crazy." I froze. My first thought was that maybe Dan had sent it to the wrong number. Maybe he meant it, but then I realized he never called me she. And if it was meant for Emily, what the hell did that message even mean? I stared at the screen, suddenly cold despite the summer heat. Emily shifted in her sleep, and I snapped out of it, locking her phone and placing it back where it had been. My heart was racing so fast I felt dizzy. I told myself not to panic, that there had to be an explanation, that it was a misunderstanding, that maybe he was helping her coordinate a surprise party for her. It was an inside joke I didn't get. I told myself all of that, and then, when we arrived at the dorm and started unpacking, I saw something else. Emily was setting up her desk, and I offered to hang some photos above her bed. There was a little box of printed pictures, some of her and her friends, others of her and Dan. At the bottom, one caught my eye. It was a selfie of Emily and Dan at some restaurant I didn't recognize. They were both dressed up, candlelight in the background, a bottle of wine in the shot. It looked like a date night photo, except I wasn't in it, and it wasn't from any trip or dinner. I didn't say anything to Emily right away. I couldn't. My hands were shaking, and I suddenly felt like I was intruding on something, on her space, her life, her privacy. But the image of that message, "Let me know when she's gone. I miss you like crazy." And now this photo that looked way too intimate for a typical father-daughter dinner, it kept looping in my head like a broken recording. That night, after we finished setting up her room, I took her out for dinner near campus. We talked about classes, her roommate, what she wanted to major in. I tried to be normal. I tried so hard to keep the mood light, but inside my stomach was in knots. When I asked about the photo, casually, trying not to seem like I was digging, she paused for a moment and said it was from a fancy dinner Dad took me to a few months ago. I asked where. She said it was in the city, some French place he wanted to try. Here's the thing. Dan hates French food. I know that sounds minor, but we've been married almost 20 years. The man gags at anything with goat cheese. He wouldn't set foot in a French restaurant unless someone forced him. Still, I didn't press. I smiled, nodded, and kept eating, even though I could barely taste anything. I was watching her closely now, how she talked about him, the way she smiled when she mentioned him. There was nothing romantic, but there was something else, something I couldn't name, an edge. That night, I stayed at a nearby hotel while she spent her first night in her dorm. I barely slept. I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen, about what it could mean, and how insane I would sound if I voiced it out loud. But then, around 2 a.m., I cracked. I opened up Emily's Instagram, private account, but I have access. She'd let me follow her years ago. I started scrolling, and there it was, buried between pictures of her and her friends, school events, and selfies. There were a few pictures I had never seen, all of them carefully captioned to sound vague. But the locations didn't match anything I knew she'd been. Weekend getaways, beach photos, one at a cabin in the woods. Always just her in the... But you could see shadows, hands, or a second cup on the table. In the comment, Dan had not a single comment. The likes were consistent, just his name, always there, like a digital fingerprint, invisible as you knew what to... I felt sick. I was spiraling. I didn't want to jump to the worst conclusion, but I couldn't unsee what I'd seen. I knew what it looked like. I just didn't know what to do with it. And then I remembered something. 2 summers ago, Emily had asked to go with her friends to California. She'd claimed she'd be staying with a friend's cousin. Dan had said he was nervous, but let her go. I didn't think much of it at the time. But now, I'm wondering if that trip ever happened, because one of the cabin photos on her Instagram, the date matched that exact weekend, and in the reflection of the window, there's a faint outline of someone standing behind her, the silhouette of a man, tall, broad shoulders, holding a coffee mug, and it looks exactly like my husband. The next morning, I couldn't look at my daughter the same way. I know how that sounds, like I'd already made up my mind about what was going on. But you have to understand, I wasn't thinking straight. I was exhausted, confused, and starting to question everything. I kept wondering if maybe I'd lost it a little, if I was just a sleep-deprived, overprotective mother losing her grip because her firstborn was moving out. But then I'd picture the message again. Let me know when she's gone. I miss you like crazy, and that image in the window, the man behind her, blurry, but I couldn't unsee it. After we said our goodbyes, after the tears, the hugs, the 1,000 reminders to text me, I got back in the car and sat there in silence for a while. The campus faded in my rearview mirror, but the thoughts didn't. Every mile back home just made the questions louder. I tried to talk myself down. Maybe Dan had that trip as a father-daughter bond. Maybe the message meant he missed me, not Emily, and it just came out weird. Maybe I was stitching together pieces of totally unrelated things and inventing the worst possible story, but none of that explained the secrecy. Why hadn't he ever mentioned the restaurant? Why didn't I know about that trip? Why the separate photos, the private messages, the subtle comments? Why the lie? And then came the thing that Emily snapped me out of denial. About halfway home, I stopped at a rest area. I needed to breathe, calm down, and honestly just splash water on my face before. While I was in the bathroom, I got a notification from our shared bank account. A charge had just gone through, 312.47s, at a spa, in a town 2 hours away from where Dan was supposed to be. It didn't make sense. He told me he was working from home that day. There was no reason for him to be anywhere near that place. And a spa? In the middle of a weekday? I opened the bank app and looked at the transaction history for the past few months. I hadn't really paid close attention. He handled most of our day-to-day bills. But now I was scanning every line, every restaurant, every location, and what I saw made my blood run cold. That same spa charge, it had shown up 3 other times in the last 6 months. Sometimes on weekends when he said he was helping his brother with something. Each one was, and then I found something worse. Hotel just one night stay, a couple $100. The billing name, Property Services Inc. or CMH Hospitality, but the addresses were, and all of them, visiting college night study retreats. Dan and been lying together, coordinate, covering whatever was going on between. It wasn't in it. I wanted to throw up. I got back in the car and sat there shaking so hard. I just stared at the wheel, wondering how the hell I was going to walk back into that house. How do you confront something when you don't even have the words for what it is? When I finally made it home, everything looked the same. The porch light, the grass freshly, my husband's car. If someone had driven by, they'd think it was just another happy house in the suburb. But as I walked up those steps, I swear I could hear the air humming with lies. Dan greeted me at the door like nothing had happened. He even asked how the trip went, if Emily got settled in okay, if I cried. He laughed like he knew I did. I couldn't respond. I think I just stared at him for a second too long, and that's when his smile faltered. I told him I needed to talk, right now. He followed me into the kitchen, asking if something happened with Emily. I said no, and then I told him exactly what I'd seen. The message, the photo, the bank charges, the trips, the spa, all of it. I laid it out calmly, too calmly. Honestly, I think it scared him more than if I'd screamed. He didn't interrupt me. He just stood there, frozen, like someone who'd been caught walking into a spotlight, and for a second I wondered if he'd confess. Just admit whatever it was. Tell me the truth. But he didn't. He laughed, a dry, pathetic little sound. Said I was being ridiculous, that I was jealous of the bond he had with Emily, that maybe I needed to talk to someone about my stress. I stared at him in disbelief, and then he said something that turned my blood to ice. He told me I'd always had a problem with how close he was to Emily, that I was paranoid and territorial, and made things weird when they weren't, that I'd twisted something good and healthy into something sick. He said I was the problem. That's when I snapped. I told him I'd seen the photos, the trips, the hotel stays, the spa, the texts, the private Instagram likes, the way she looked at him, the way he looked at her. And you know what he did? He went completely silent, just stood there, mouth slightly open, like he couldn't believe I'd figured it out. That's when I knew. He didn't deny the charges. He didn't explain the message. He didn't even ask what photos I was talking about, because he knew. He knew exactly what I'd seen, but still, he didn't admit it. Instead, he turned it around and said I was endangering our family by suggesting something that disgusting, that I was sick for even thinking it, that he was the victim here, being accused of something horrific by the woman he loved. And just like that, I felt myself slip into another version of reality, one where I couldn't trust what I saw, where maybe I was crazy, where maybe the man standing in front of me wasn't a liar, but I was just broken. But then he said one more thing. He told me I should drop it before I regret what this does to Emily. Emily, not him, her. And suddenly it hit me. This wasn't just about lies. This wasn't just about secrets. This was about protection. He wasn't protecting himself. He was protecting her. And that was the moment I realized, whatever was going on between them, she was in on it. After Dan stormed out of the kitchen, I sat there in silence for what felt like an hour. My body didn't move, but my brain was unraveling. Every memory I had with Emily, every moment I thought was pure, it felt tainted. Not because I thought she had done something wrong, but because I didn't know who she really was anymore, and that terrified me. It would be easier to believe Dan was just manipulating her, that she was too young, too trusting, too naive to see it, but she wasn't. Emily's always been sharp, observant. She notices things I miss, anticipates emotions before I even feel them. She would know if her dad was crossing a line, and if she knew, I opened my laptop and hesitated before typing in her college login info. I know, it's a breach of privacy. I get it. But right now, my reality was crumbling. I needed truth, and if that meant being the kind of mom I never wanted to be, so be it. Emily had used the same password for years. It took me less than 30 seconds to get in. What I found made my heart stop. There were dozens of emails between her and Dan, none romantic, none obviously inappropriate. But the way they wrote to each other, it wasn't how a father and daughter talk. It was how co-conspirators talk. Secretive, inside jokes, code words. One email simply said, "Same place, same time, and yeah, I'll wear it again." Another had an attachment that had been deleted from the cloud, but not before the file name caught my eye. It was named The List Final PDF. That's when I remembered something Emily said last Christmas. She told me her New Year's resolution was to get the life I deserve. At the time, I thought she was being dramatic about college applications. Now, I didn't know what the hell she meant. I clicked over to her messages next. Most were harmless. Friends from school, her roommate, professors. But one thread made my blood run cold. It was a conversation with someone saved as D, and the first thing I saw? "She's gone. Back home now. We're good." Sent 40 minutes after I left her dorm. The reply? "Miss you already. She's going to find out soon. Not sure how long I can keep this up." I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. I clicked into the full thread and scrolled, slowly, dreading every word. The entire conversation went back months. Hidden from me, quiet, careful, but the undertone was clear. This wasn't just a father talking to his daughter. This was two people hiding something. Something deep, personal, and dangerous. Not necessarily romantic, but certainly not innocent. And then I saw the message that broke me. "After the money clears, I want to go somewhere warm. Just you and me." That's when the pieces came together. The spa days, the hotels, the whispered promises. But not love, not an affair, not that. A plan. I shut the laptop slowly. My hands felt numb, like they didn't belong to me anymore. My daughter wasn't sleeping with her father. That wasn't it. They were plotting something. Together. Something that involved secrecy, coordinated lies, and, based on that last message, money. After the money clears. Just you and me. Those words looped in my head like static. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or horrified. I hadn't walked into the kind of nightmare I feared, but what I'd stepped into was still a betrayal. A deep, methodical one. A quiet arrangement unfolding beneath my nose. Dan and Emily were hiding something big from me, and it wasn't just some emotional boundary crossed or some weird daddy-daughter attachment. It was a scheme, and suddenly I started thinking back. All the weird little moments I'd dismissed before. The life insurance policy Dan convinced me to increase last fall after a health scare. The random visits Emily made home senior year, even when she said she was staying on campus to study. The one time I caught Dan looking at my filing cabinet, and he said he was just searching for a misplaced utility bill. The calls that dropped when I walked into the room. The way they would go quiet around me. The shift I felt in my own house but never understood. I pulled out my phone and went to our shared cloud storage, where we back up financial documents. Dan didn't know I had it synced to my private email as well. Sure enough, the newest folder was called Transition Doc. It was password protected, of course, but then I noticed something else. A PDF Dan had uploaded 3 days ago, right after Emily and I left for the college trip. It was titled Power of Attorney Draft PDF, and it listed my name, with Dan as the primary executor. It wasn't signed yet, but it was already pre-filled with my medical information, my financial details, my social security number, my entire life. Everything I'd tried so hard to and that's when I understood. This wasn't about romance. This wasn't some twisted it was about control. Dan and Emily were trying to take everything, my assets, my autonomy, my identity, and I think they were letting me disappear. I was shaking. You know that feeling when your body reacts before your brain does? When your blood runs cold, but your heart won't stop pounding. That's where I was, sitting on the floor in my bedroom, staring at my phone, trying to make sense of the hell I'd just uncovered. Dan had drafted power of attorney papers, naming himself as the person who could legally make decisions for me. Financial, medical, everything. But why? I wasn't sick. I wasn't unstable. I wasn't going anywhere. Unless that was the plan. I stared at the document again, zooming in, searching for some detail I'd missed, and that's when I saw it. Buried at the bottom, under the executor line, was another name. Secondary executor, Emily C. daughter. I nearly dropped the phone. They were both listed, both set to take over if anything happened to me. One signature away from wiping me out of my own life. I needed answers. And fast. So I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I called Dan's sister, my sister-in-law Meredith. Meredith and I had drifted over the past year. Not out of malice, just life. But she was sharp. She worked in real estate law and never liked to play dumb. If anyone knew what Dan was up to behind the scenes even a little, it would be her. I didn't mention anything up front. Just said I'd seen Dan fill out some legal documents and I was trying to figure out if he was working with an attorney. She paused. And then she said something that made my whole chest lock. She asked me if Dan had finally told me about the inheritance situation. I said no. She hesitated, then said, "Oh, wow, I thought you knew." That's when she explained it. Apparently, Dan had recently been named in a pending inheritance from a great-aunt who passed months ago. But here's the catch. It was tied up in probate. There was an obscure clause that complicated things. He could only receive the full amount, over $900,000, if he could prove financial stability and sole legal decision-making in the household. In other words, he needed me out of the way, either by divorce or by power of attorney, or worse. That's why he was pushing for control over everything. That's why he was trying to make it look like I was unstable or unfit to manage my own affairs. That's why he and Emily were working so closely together, because they were planning for a future without me in it. After the call with Meredith, I sat in silence for a long time. So that was it. Dan stood to inherit almost $1 million if he could prove I was out of the picture. Not dead, necessarily, but legally irrelevant, voiceless, controlled, and he'd already set the wheels in motion. But what broke me wasn't just the paperwork or the lies. It was that Emily was part of it. I kept hoping, begging in my head, that maybe she was just going along with him, that maybe he had her convinced it was just a formality, something harmless. Maybe she didn't know what she was really part of. That hope didn't last. 3 days after I returned from dropping her off, she came back home for the weekend, claimed she forgot a charger and wanted to spend some time with her little sister. I played along, smiled, hugged her, pretended like I didn't know anything. But inside, I was scanning her every move, every word. She wasn't the same. Her eyes didn't hold mine the way they used to. She looked through me like I was a prop, background noise. And then I noticed something. She kept texting, quietly, quickly. She'd lower her phone just enough for the screen to tilt out of view, but I caught a glimpse of the name at the top once. D, new line, a separate contact, not just Dad, not the usual number. I didn't ask about it. That night, she went to bed early. Dan was working late, as usual. I waited until the house was silent, and then I searched her bag. I didn't want to. God, I didn't want to, but I had to. Tucked between a makeup pouch and a laptop charger was a slim black notebook. No name on the cover. Just a sticker on the back that said, "If found, please destroy." I opened it. Inside were lists. Pages and pages of lists. What Mom keeps in the filing cabinet. What time she leaves for work. Phrases that make her cry. Accounts still in her name only. I flipped to the next page. It was titled, "Things to say if she suspects anything." And under that, tell her she's stressed. Say she misunderstood. Make her feel like she's imagining it. Remind her she's been forgetful lately. Ask if she's eaten today. Subtle gaslight. Use Dad's illness as a distraction if needed. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was standing in someone else's house. Someone else's life. This was my child. My baby. And she had rehearsed lines for manipulating me. Had written them out like a script. With bullet points. I took pictures of every page. Every name. Every plan. I put the notebook back exactly where I found it. And quietly backed out of her room. I locked myself in the bathroom and sat on the floor until the sun came up. Because now I knew. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a takedown. By the time the sun rose, I had a plan. I didn't scream. I didn't confront. I didn't pack a bag or make threats. I wasn't going to give them a scene. That's what they were prepared for. That's what they wanted. To label me as emotional, unstable, too fragile to manage things on my own. I was going to let them think they were winning. Emily came into the kitchen that morning like nothing had happened. She poured herself cereal, scrolled her phone, and asked if I wanted to help her find her charger later. I said sure, smiled, offered to make her eggs. She said no, she wasn't hungry. Of course not. She was too busy feeding off the idea that I had no idea. I waited until she left the house, claimed she was meeting a friend nearby. Then I called in a favor. A quiet one. My cousin Jules is a forensic accountant. We hadn't spoken in a while, but when she picked up and heard my voice shaking, she said 3 words. Say what you need. I sent her the photos, the emails, the power of attorney draft, the notebook pages. I didn't give her commentary, just the facts. She told me she'd need a few days, maybe a week, to dig into Dan's financials. I gave her access to our bank records, our mortgage, everything. Then I called an old therapist of mine, someone I hadn't seen in years. but trusted. I booked a few sessions immediately, and yes, I made sure there was documentation. Because if Dan and Emily were planning to paint me as mentally unwell, I was going to beat them to the narrative, with actual proof of my emotional stability and record of my concerns. I also visited our family doctor, told her I was under stress, sure, but asked for a full physical and mental evaluation. She ran every test, even asked if I felt safe at home. I told her yes, for now, but I needed everything in writing, and she agreed. Because this wasn't about playing defense anymore. This was me, collecting receipts, setting the stage, preparing my move. But the biggest piece of the puzzle? That came from someone I never expected. Claire, my youngest. 14, smart and observant like her sister, but with one key difference. She still trusted me. That night, Claire came to my room with a weird look on her face. She closed the door behind her, climbed onto the bed, and whispered something that made my skin crawl. She said, "Emily told me not to trust you." I asked her what she meant. She hesitated, then said Emily had been testing her lately, asking what I was doing during the day, what time I left, who I called, what I said when I was alone. Emily was trying to recruit her, turn her against me, but Claire was scared, confused, and something in her gut said, "Don't tell Emily everything." She chose me. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about protecting my daughter from her own sister. The next week passed like a dream I couldn't wake up from. Emily returned to campus, Dan went back to working late, and everything in the house seemed normal. But under the surface, I was documenting everything. Their messages, their charges, their movements. And Claire? Claire became my little shadow. I never asked her to spy. I never told her anything that would burden her. But she kept coming to me, quietly, cautiously, saying things like, "Emily called again today. She wanted to know if you were still working." Or, "Dad said you looked tired and told me not to leave you alone for too long." Like they were waiting for me to fall apart. Except I didn't. Instead, I stayed calm. Because Jules, my cousin the accountant, had just sent me an encrypted file. And inside it, everything. Bank transfers between Dan and an unregistered account under Emily's name. Withdrawals timed perfectly with hotel stays. Spa visits. Business expenses that were clearly just staged receipts. Even a suspicious rental agreement for a small apartment in Florida, under Dan's name, but with Emily listed as an approved occupant. They were planning to leave me, take the inheritance, gain power of attorney, stage a decline in my mental state, and eventually move out, together, with full control of our assets. They wanted me confused, quiet, and legally irrelevant. So here's what I did. First, I made copies of everything, printed and digital. Then I hired an attorney, quietly, one who specialized in estate fraud, financial abuse, and conservatorship disputes. She reviewed the case and told me point blank, "They're playing a long game, but it's sloppier than they think." So I let them keep playing, until one Saturday morning. I waited until Emily was home for another quick visit. Dan was in the kitchen making coffee, still pretending like everything was fine, and that's when the doorbell rang. A process server stood there with 2 thick envelopes, one for Dan, one for Emily. Dan looked confused. Emily looked nervous. I didn't say a word. Inside those envelopes? A restraining order filed against Dan for financial coercion and intent to commit fraud, an emergency petition to freeze all joint accounts, and for Emily, a cease and desist order related to impersonation, conspiracy to commit identity fraud, and coercion of a minor, Claire. That last, it came from a signed statement Claire gave, explaining how Emily had been manipulated into gathering, subtly planting doubts, and encouraged her to lie. Claire had written it on her own. My attorney was impressed. And I was done playing nice. Dan exploded, shouted that I was insane, that I was destroying the family, that he was the victim. Emily didn't say a word, just stood there, pale and frozen, watching her perfect. I asked them both, calmly, to leave. They refused, until I mentioned I had every transaction detail saved on multiple drives and shared with multiple parties, including Jules, my lawyer, and 2 journalists I'd contacted. Dan started crying. I told them they could either walk out now or be escorted out by police later. Their choice. They left. That night, the house was quiet, in a way I hadn't felt in years. Claire and I sat on the couch while she leaned into me and whispered, "You're still you," and I held her. My life to update. It's been 2 months. The accounts are in my name now. The lawyer is handling the inheritance clause Dan thought he could manipulate. Turns out the great aunt's estate doesn't look kindly on fraud, especially not when you try to sideline your wife and stage her mental decline to seize assets. Dan's being investigated. Emily is back at college. We're not speaking. I get updates through Claire, who says she barely leaves her dorm. I don't know if she regrets it, or if she's just embarrassed she didn't pull it off. But me, I'm not broken. I'm awake, and for the first time in years, I'm finally in control. They tried to erase me. Instead, I erased them. Quietly, legally, permanently, and I didn't need to scream to do it. All I had to do was listen, and wait.